Hey, welcome back to Pro Studio Live. I'm here with Ian Sutton. We're talking about equalizers. The first couple segments we discussed what an equalizer was, and then we discussed how they work, and now we're going to be getting into how you can use them to improve your mixes. So, Ian, you have a project open up on Pro Tools right now.
Yeah, I've got a project opened up here on Pro Tools right now, and thank you everybody for sticking with it. Now we're gonna do a lot more, hopefully a lot more listening.
Cool.
And actually dive into some common, and again, these are maybe guidelines, places to start. Some common frequencies over common instruments that you may want. Good places to start with your EQ. Just a little anecdote here. I was working, did a session here at Signature Sound a long time ago, and I had an engineer come in from England, and he was working with this band, and he's a pretty big producer, and I was fresh out of school, and I go in, and at the end of the day, I was a Pro Tools operator for the session. At the end of the day, me and another guy who's the other Pro Tools operator went in, and we looked at the board after the engineer left and wrote down all his EQ settings. And I was like, yes, now I know how to EQ a snare drum. And I used those settings on my next session, and it did not sound anything like his settings. So again, that's just a little anecdote. These are just guidelines. I mean, or places to start, ideas to start with. Every instrument is going to sound different and is going to need different EQ, different compression. The same instrument in a different, literally the same instrument recorded with the same player on the same day in two different songs may have two separate EQ settings. So you can copy these settings down if you want, but chances are they're not going to sound the same. So
yeah. So let's get into it. We have some drums here first, correct?
Yeah.
We're gonna take a look at the song that we've been playing kind of parts of throughout this show. It's kind of it's a rock track. Was this recorded here at Signature Sound?
This was recorded here.
Oh, cool.
This was recorded at another time when I did another song for another tutorial. So this is pretty much recorded without EQ.
Okay.
I wanted to record everything very dry so that when I use the other song in a different online tutorial, we could really hear the compression and the EQ and didn't already have that in it.
Yeah.
So
what we'll be hearing as a starting point isn't tracked in with any compression, EQ, any of that?
None.
Cool.
None of it. The vocal, however, the artist came here on a different day and tracked the vocal, so the vocal has a slight little bit of compression and EQ on it, okay. I think. So, but well, with that,
let's take a listen to some drums and see how some EQ might affect your decisions on mixing drums.
Okay, so first off, let's just play from the verse. And I'm going to play it back with no EQ. And then I'll play it back with just a quick EQ that I put on here the other day. So here it is with no EQ.
Gotta get my ducks in a row. Gotta get them in a row.
So already, still good sounds in there. So let's add the EQ back in that I just put in. Not feeling that guitar yet.
Gotta get my ducks
I'll bypass them.
in a row. Gotta get them in a row. Got an
Add them back in.
place to go, an important place that I've got to go.
Cool. So with just a few little moves, little EQ moves and EQ settings, it sounds a whole lot better. The drums sound a lot punchier, bigger. The bass is more defined. So.
Can I take a look at the? Can we take a look at the kick drum EQ curve that you may have, and maybe go into depth about why you went there. Just I like how it rounded out. And rock track, it comes, a lot of the energy comes from the drums and the bass, the rhythm section, driving force. And I felt like the moves that you had made on the EQs really helped to bring that to the forefront of my attention. And that's ultimately our job as mixing engineers, is to catch the attention of the listener, and we have control over that, sort of.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a rock track. So it's got, the drums, if they want to, kind of maintain and fit into that genre, they need to be punchy. They need to have, some power behind them, and also definition. Were this to a jazz record, boy, it wouldn't sound jazzy.
Definition is a great word to use. That actually was, that word was escaping me, but that describes exactly what I was hearing. The kick drum sounds more defined now without all of the EQ, or I'm sorry, with the EQ that you had put on it. What EQ plugin are you using for this session, for the drums?
So I actually grabbed the Neve 1081. Okay. Just for the drums. It's a pretty versatile EQ. And it has a few more options than the 1073. I think it has 4, 5, or 6 bands with the filters.
Okay.
So it's a pretty classic EQ for kick and snare and drums.
Okay.
The 1081 sounds awesome. So let's pull it up. So these drums, there's a kick in and a kick out. So the kick in mic is actually mic'd inside the beater head, or inside the resonant head, just a little bit. There was a hole in there. Put that mic in, and then the kick out is actually a microphone outside of the kick drum. So let's just listen to the kick in mic with no EQ. Give me just a second here. There we go. There it is.
And this is just a kick in, right?
This is just the kick in mic. Yeah, and we may need to pump this up a little bit so we can hear it. So initially, what I heard was it's a little papery. I mean, I don't know if you're, hopefully the listeners and the viewers have decent speakers they can listen to, but it has a fair amount of punch. It has a pretty good low end in it, but it's kind of papery. It has there's some things in the middle that I don't really like, and it needs to have a little bit more snap on it. So what we did, let me just bypass it really quickly so you can hear. So quite a bit of difference. Let me just start from 0. With a kick drum, I typically, it all depends on what's there, right? But this one, and sometimes here, this might be actually a good place to bring up the frequency analyzer, just to kind of see what's happening. So we have a lot of lows. There's a little scoop in the middle already, and then a little bit of that snapping that beater head in there. I kind of like where that's going, but for rock, it needs to fit in a little bit more. So we'll kind of define that a little bit more. So what I had done initially was take off just a little bit of the very low lows. So at about 47 hertz, this is a roll off, so it's cutting the low frequency. And then I think I boosted it a little bit. So that's too much, you can hear it. But the Neve sound just sounds great. So a little bit there, and then a frequency, 60 hertz, 60 between, you want to maybe look at your kick drum, figure out where that's going to live. The fundamental frequency, going back to the first segment, with the kick drum is typically between 35, which is really low, and I would say 70, okay. 70 or 80, okay. Somewhere around there. It's typically a good frequency or fundamental frequency, because every kick drum has a note, right? You don't want to, if that kick drum is singing right around 60 hertz, you don't want to go cut 60 hertz, because then that's the fundamental, that's the power of that kick drum.
Maybe if you're experiencing some sort of like a buildup or something and it's just undesirable, and you find a good frequency. I've had good experiences kind of going by octaves. If I found that 60 hertz was doing something that I enjoyed, I would also go and try whatever I'm doing at 120 hertz or at 30 hertz.
Absolutely.
Just because it's going to be the same energy, but in an incremental area that might be really where what you're hearing that you don't like is, or what you do like.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we're mixing and thinking about EQ also, not everyone can listen to 60 hertz.
Right.
You know, when you listen on your computer speakers, I mean, unless, no, probably not, probably don't do 60 hertz, right? That's a big thump. So 120 hertz, they might actually play 120 hertz. So you want to make sure you don't cut out those harmonics, those octaves of that, so that translates well into all mixes or all speakers. Another frequency I typically go through with a kick drum is anywhere between 200 to 400 hertz. That to me is like that papery sound of a kick drum. So let's solo this up again. So with this EQ, I'm going to click this and you can see this is picking the frequency, 220, 270, 330, 390. And I'm just going to put it a high Q, so that's a narrow bandwidth. I'm going to pull that out. And I'm going to kind of play with the frequency. Let's bypass it. I like what that's doing. Maybe it's too much.
That papery sound is definitely going away as you were making those changes.
Yeah, so that's one of the things. I mean, anybody can go, let's boost the highs and cut the lows, or boost the highs, boost the lows a little bit. But it's a lot of it, EQing, to me, is finding that frequency that doesn't fit right, and getting rid of it or moving.
What I'm hearing out of this is it's helping to isolate what you're looking at, so to speak. I mean, granted, we're all audio engineers. We don't really look. We use our ears. But still, when I'm envisioning the kick drum, like when the EQ was bypassed, it had, I could hear something there, and in EQing that, you're just kind of focusing the attention to what it should be. I guess that's partially up to taste of the mixing engineer, right? But
yeah, taste and genre and all that stuff. Yeah,
I feel that just in those two moves that you made alone, it helped to isolate and to kind of, I don't know, give it its own place, I suppose. It shaped it a little bit better.
Yep.
It's very fascinating.
Yeah, that's one of those. I think I may have taken that from that session with that engineer. So really, I love on a kick drum, an analog, an acoustic kick drum that I've recorded, to really somewhere between like 250 and 400. There's usually just a kind of a papery sound. So we'll get that out of there. And then I want to bring up the snap. That it has to snap on there, and that's usually anywhere between 1K and 5K. So I might bring it way up just to kind of hear what it's doing. Pull it down, hear what it's doing. Get a little bit, and I'll pull it back in the mix. Remember, I said if you're going to solo, put it back in the mix. Hear it kind of come up there a little bit. So let's move that up a little more, and then for a little bit more highs, a little bit more snap on that kick drum. Let's go with something a little higher, like what we have here, 6K. 7 kilohertz. That's the
slap.
yeah. There's bypassed. And it might sound a little funny by itself.
Oh,
But really listen to that snap, the high end.
How
And that's
would-
going to poke through and help out a lot.
How would it sound with the kick out microphone? Because on the same topic that we never the person who buys this record will never hear in solo the kick in. However, they might be able to poke their ears and their focus, their attention to the kick drum, but that was captured using 2 microphones. Do you ever maybe take those 2 channels, sum them to one, whether it's through a bus to an aux situation, and then EQ those as one instrument? Or do you kind of play with the 2 together in solo? What are some good advice about that?
Yeah, you could absolutely do that. I mean, the options are just about endless. I mean, with this one, I happen to know that these are fairly in phase with each other. That's one of the things we were going to talk about if we had time. But I also know that the kick out mic captured a lot of cymbals and stuff. Okay. So I want to when I would go to the kick out mic, I know that I want to get rid of all that stuff out of it. Because the kick out mic is typically the thump, the thud, and because they are perfectly in phase with each other, the 2 together sound pretty good in the low end.
Now, do you think that if you were to make exaggerated moves, maybe adding or cutting 15 decibels of any given frequency, that might affect the phase relationship between the kick in and the kick out?
It could, up at those higher frequencies or the
Okay.
frequencies that we're making those moves at.
Okay.
It might make it, maybe not necessarily affect the phase relationship between the 2 instruments, but it might make it a little cloudy.
Okay.
That's kind of the best way I can describe the phase discrepancies that big EQ or large EQ moves do. It kind of clouds things up a little bit.
Do you think it could be, I guess, in another word, taking away from the separation, or from the intelligibility of the separation, because you're adding you cloudiness, kind of
it could.
unclear.
That's something you want to listen for.
Okay. Cool.
So let's. I'm going to bypass and unbypass and make sure that one's not louder than the other. We'll
Right.
talk about gain staging. It's actually a little bit louder when it's unbypassed, so I'm going to crank it up just a little bit. Cool. That's about right. Let's take a look at the kick out mic. So the kick out mic, if you can hear it, I'll pump it up a little bit. It's just the boominess. Just have the boominess there. That may have been recorded with a little EQ. Oh no, I've got my EQ is still on from last time. Okay, so there's the kick out mic by itself. It's kind of, there's nothing flattering about that. It's kind of nasty.
Yeah.
So I actually would take this and let's pull all the high frequencies out of there. So this right here is your high cut.
Those are your filtering options right there.
Yep. So low cut is the outside. That's low cut. High cut is this inside. So that's one advantage the 1081 has over the 1073. The 1073, remember, just for the high band only had a shelving EQ.
Right.
So that's another reason why the 1081 is just great for drums. I'm going to go further than that and go back over here, dial it in, the highs again at 3K, maybe, if my mouse works. Just pull it down some more.
Okay.
And then maybe I'll give it a little bit of cutoff at 47 hertz, but I'm going to go back down here to the low end again. Maybe crank it up. I don't know, something like that maybe. Let's hear the two together.
Problem I'm
And I think I still hear that papery sound in this guy. So what did we dial in? It was about 380, 390?
Something like that.
Oops. There we go. That's the boom, the rumble.
Yep.
They're just, love that frequency. I love taking out that frequency. Okay, together. Now bypass. That's going to stick out of that mix a lot more.
It sounds a lot more focused, and it sounds like it has its own spot, and it's taking command of that spot, both in the rumble area and in the kind of the slappier area, the part that really is going to poke through on all systems.
Yep.
That's incredible.
EQ in. EQ out.
gotta get my ducks in a row, gotta get them in.
Would you just listen to that? That's insane.
So that's another reason why the 1081 is awesome for drums. That was probably one of my go-to drum EQs.
You can achieve similar results not using that EQ, correct?
Sure.
Those were just the decisions that were made given that particular EQ. I mean, the numbers would likely be the same on any other EQ, whether it's a graphic, parametric, fully parametric, what have you.
Sure.
That's just the tonality of this one that you chose to like that out of your own experiences. You chose to use that one.
Yeah, we could have gotten close to the same thing with like the 7-band EQ.
Right.
Or the EQ3.
Cool. What might you do? Let's say you were completed with drums right now. That was your everything is there, and I'm seeing summer bypass. But let's just say that that's how it is. What might you do on a bus, on your drum bus, to help increase like hearing everything, making it stand out a little bit more? Like if you were to play it back, would you hear anything as of this point that you might want to affect, and how might you go about doing that on a drum bus?
Well, on a drum bus, so remember, on a drum bus, I actually have one set up here. We've got everything sending to that bus. So basically putting an EQ on that drum bus is going to EQ essentially all of the drum instruments together.
Would you advise against EQing on a bus situation when you have the ability to affect the individual tracks?
Maybe, maybe not. If you have the time to go in and work with the individual tracks, I say go for it. Sometimes though, we don't always have the time. Everyone's on a budget now, and you might have to go and start doing some bus EQ. Bus EQ on drums, typically on drums, adding a little bit of low end, maybe adding some high end, maybe notching out some of the mid frequencies. In a rock song, it's that's the overall thing with drums, because the guitars need to live in the middle, the vocal needs to live in the middle, and then the bass guitar, and then whatever the other synths or keys or anything needs to live in the middle. The drums we open up the middle for other things.
Okay.
So I might, on a bus EQ or on a drum bus, throw an EQ on there, and then maybe do less than I did here.
Okay.
Maybe boost a little bit of low end, boost a little bit of high end, kind of broad strokes.
Right.
And then go back in to the individual instruments, and then tighten up little things where I needed to.
So you're focusing on the individual tracks as far as doing the more surgical moves, and then using the bus to kind of put the gloss finish, the last kind of 1% that it might need after everything is there, when you're married to your decision on the individual level, like individual track level. And then you get to the bus, everything's playing, you're not soloing anything, all the elements are in play, and you just think it just needs a little bit more on the bottom, a little bit more on the top, everything else is kind of good. That's how you might approach a bus EQ situation?
That's definitely one way to approach it. There's tons of different ways.
We actually had a question from a little bit back from a user named Daryl. He mentions he's very conservative when using EQ in his mixes, but he finds his mixes, though they're clear, sound very stuck together. I mentioned the word separation a little bit in this section. How would you go about, what's your philosophy on separation in general? Do you prefer things to be very separate in your mixes, or do you like there to be that sort of glue, if you will? And if so, what are some tips you might give in getting that kind of sound, if you will?
Well, I mean, I like separation, the separation of instruments, and I might use reverb and delays and some other effects to kind of glue those instruments together.
Okay.
I feel like everything needs to have its own sonic space in the frequency spectrum. Once you do that, then you have some other options about gluing things together. With that said, you can have too much separation. I was just working with a track last week, and it was a country song, and then it had a rap verse in it. And I know, it was cool, it was different. And the rapper he just didn't fit at all. Like too much separation. He felt way different than everything else. So I had to use EQ to kind of tone him down.
Okay.
So rather than boosting frequencies and making him stand out,
Interesting.
when I put him low in the mix, he was a little too low. And put him high in the mix, too bright, stuck out. So I had to use an EQ to kind of, make them work together. So
using EQ to kind of help things fit together, or would you say maybe boosting, let's say everything sounds great, but it's a little stuck together, maybe boosting a couple decibels in the range of the fundamental frequency of these instruments maybe might help increase separation, whereas your anecdote was mentioning, you wanted to decrease the separation, so you kind of wanted to push him into the box. If you're on the other end of that, trying to get out of the box a little bit, not in the box, out of the box discussion, none of that, but if you're trying to kind of give everything its own little space, might you go to the fundamental frequencies and work something around there to try to achieve that separation?
Sure. You could absolutely do that.
Cool.
I mean, there's so many options based on the instrumentation, based on the arrangement. So try. You can try going down to the fundamental, toying with that a little bit. If that doesn't work, maybe you need to boost some of the upper harmonics and some of the overtones and some of the things up higher. So it's hard to say, do this.
Yeah, of course,
all the time.
It's all philosophy. So now, given that we just took a look at the bass information of drums, this is kind of getting me curious about the bass guitar. I'm a bassist, and the changes that you made. Let's say I'm in this band. The changes that you made to that kick drum, now I can't hear my bass guitar. How would you go about shaping the relationship between the kick drum and the bass drum using only an EQ?
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's having been familiar with this track, I kind of knew that the kick drum was gonna be on the bottom. Like the kick drum was gonna live lower than the bass guitar. The bass guitar was gonna live maybe up around like 80 hertz.
Okay.
Kick drum was gonna live right around 60. So I had already kind of known that when I went in, and that I found that out by just listening to the two.
Okay.
Trying one, and if that didn't work, try the other. So with the bass guitar, what did we do? We turn it up a little so we can hear it. His bass was a little buzzy. So that's with the EQ in, the EQ out. Just gave it a little bit more definition down at the bottom.
I can definitely hear the change, though pretty subtle. It definitely seems like it would be fitting really nicely with the kick drum, including the changes that you had made.
Yeah, and I think it does. And let's play those two together.
Oh yeah.
Let me turn it down a little bit. Nope. So on that guy, what we did is we ended up rolling off at about 92, which seems like a lot. But you have to remember on the Neve, that curve or that shelf is really gradual. Had this been a 24 decibel per octave cut, that would have been too much.
Yeah, that might be not necessarily desirable.
So on the Neve and on the low end with the bass stuff, sometimes I'll cut and then go in and boost right around the same frequency that you cut.
Okay.
So on the Neve, we boosted at 100, which is it's a nice wide curve.
If you were to do something like that, and that's also a technique that I like to employ. I kind of, in my own work, I call it a push-pull effect.
Yeah.
Because you're pulling out some of the frequencies and then pushing it back to after you've kind of tamed it a little bit. Would you recommend using a shelf to do something to bring back that if you were coming through a filter situation? You filter out some information. Would you shelf back up, or would you use a bell curve, or does it really honestly kind of differ per project?
I would try them both and then use whichever one sounded better.
Great answer.
Yeah, try them all. Try them all out. I mean, it's really easy with digital and with most EQs to switch between different curves. In the analog world, it used to be a lot harder to try things out. You unpatch it and then patch this one in, then you couldn't really A/B things.
Right.
In the digital world, yeah, try it out. Try a bell curve. If that sounds too weird or not booming enough, add a shelf.
For this particular instance, is your low band engaged as a bell curve?
It
or
is
a
engaged
shelf?
as a bell
Okay.
on that bass. So if we want to hear the subtle differences there, whoops. It's really hard to hear the difference.
It is a very subtle difference.
I feel like the bell just gave me a little bit more definition at that, right around that frequency.
Yeah, I agree.
I think with the kick drum playing, that's probably what I had done. With the kick drum playing, the bell gave it the ability to interact with that kick drum a little bit better. I think the shelf may have pulled it up a little bit too much, but it's all taste, right?
Yeah, I feel like with the shelf engaged, it did the same thing. However, it didn't give it its own spot. With the bell, your kick drum is here and your bass is right next to it. Whereas with the shelf, it was just kind of the kick and the bass were kind of both right there, and you could tell. But I mean, that's just listening to two elements of the entire mix. Maybe if you were to unsolo all of that, you wouldn't even be able to hear the bass if it was still engaged in the shelf, just by that minor difference. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the beauty of it all. There's so many choices. Let's see, where should we go next?
Let's take a look at the guitars. The guitars were pretty cool. I liked the rhythm that he was playing, and that kind of seems to help drive the track. That might be something I always have issues with, is guitars and vocals always competing for the mid-range, and that's the meat of a rock song.
Right. What I had done with this, or what I like on a rock song like this, I'd normally probably try and work on my bass and drums first. Get the rhythm section right. Get the EQ of the frequencies of that right, because it's got to be driving. And then I would probably go to like the vocal or the guitars, depending on who was supposed to play the lead role there.
Right.
So I feel like with this one, I think we went to the vocal and kind of made sure that the vocal sounded, where it's supposed to, because it's a little more poppy.
That's another huge thing to take note of, is the lead role in a mix will help your decision as far as EQing and what is going to take that forefront. I mentioned it earlier. Our job as mixing engineers is to help guide the attention of the listener to the important parts of the song, and you really have to be able to identify that before you even make those choices.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, really taking a close look at what's going on in the song, I mean, it's going to save you a lot of time with EQing or with anything after that, right?
Oh, yeah. One of the mistakes that I made when I was fresh out of school and I was kind of scared of vocals because I didn't know how it was supposed to sound. So I'd mix the track, the instrumental, and make it just gigantic, huge. I mean, I was so happy with, yes, this track sounds amazing. All right, now let's put the most important part of that song in the song. There's no space for it.
Exactly, and then there's just nowhere for it to reside.
And then I was tied to the decisions that I made with the guitars or with the synths or with things that lived in the vocal frequencies. I worked so hard on getting those things to sound good. I had an emotional relationship with those settings, and it sounds silly, but even subconsciously. So when I started turning around and changing my mixing style to figure out what's the most important part of the song, and then working from there, and then building things around it, my mixes got way better real fast.
Find the moneymaker and mix for the moneymaker.
Yeah. Who's paying the bill? Is the guitar player paying the bill? No.
I mean, maybe if it's a Van Halen track and they got a huge guitar solo in the middle of the song, that's the one that everyone listens to the song for the guitar solo. Mix for the guitar solo. Otherwise, pay close attention to what's going on in the song. Figure out where the moneymaker is, and make sure everything can play nicely with it.
Absolutely. So let's listen to the guitar and the vocal together.
Gotta get my ducks in a row, gotta get them in.
I think on the original mix of this song, I wasn't really happy with the way the guitar sounded, so.
Got an important place to go, an important place that I've got to go.
I used that, and let's not even mess with that. Let's just stick with EQ. So the vocal and guitar, they're fighting for some of the same frequencies. Some of that right around 1 to 3K, I think.
Gotta get my ducks in a row, gotta get them.
Let's change the panning so we're even.
Gotta get my ducks in a row, gotta get them in a row.
You can even see it on the analyzer that they're both coming in around the same place.
Yeah. Right there.
Yep.
And if we click, actually we can see that's about 2600 hertz.
Okay.
Got an important.
So let me turn off the guitars.
Gotta get my ducks in a row.
Yeah, you see that little boost up there.
In.
The guitars are fighting for that same thing. So I think what I ultimately did was go to the guitars and dial in, 2700 hertz, and
Just brought it back a little bit.
Pull it down a little bit.
Out of curiosity, before I go on a little further, do you happen to remember what microphone you used for this guitar?
I don't. It might have been a U87.
Okay.
It was recorded here in this room.
Okay.
It was either an 87 or a combination of 414 and 57, but I think it was just a single 87.
Okay. Okay.
Gotta get my ducks in a
So
row.
on the vocal,
gotta
I
get-
think he needed a little bit more body. It was a little small. So I went in there and gave it a little bit more. Let's bypass this.
Gotta get
Bring it
my
in.
ducks in a row, gotta get them in. Gotta get my ducks in a row. Gotta get my ducks in a row.
So
That little bottom end definitely helped kind of bring a little bit of chest out of the singer.
little fullness in there, and part of the decision to do that was also based on the fact that this guitar didn't have a whole lot. I mean, I'm just purely listening. I'm not watching the analyzer at this point, but it doesn't feel like it needed to live down there.
Right.
So we gave him a little bit of boost at like 220, rolled off everything under 80, and I ended up dropping on one of my favorite things to do on vocals, and this was, I started doing this, 4 or 5 years ago, was cutting back around like between 800 and like 1K or 1.5K. There's like a nasally frequency in there. So I think on this one, I ended up pulling it back about 1.5K on the vocal, just a little bit.
this on the guitar?
That's on. Thank you. I'm looking at the wrong one. There we go.
Gotta get my ducks in a row. Gotta get them.
So here's that frequency.
Gotta get my ducks in a row.
If we
Gotta
unbypass
get
it.
them in
Oh, wow.
a row. Got an important place to go.
So if I pull it all the way out, you can hear it.
That I've got to go.
And I pulled that out just a little bit.
And she's
Added a
dancer
little
on
bit of-
Oregon
little bit of
Street.
juice on the
She's
top.
up on-
Oh boy, engineering terms, right? Gave them a little bit more clarity up at like 12K. And then from there, I moved on.
Okay.
So to the guitars, remember, we said they were fighting at like about 3K for the same frequencies. So let's get those together.
Gotta get my ducks in a row. Gotta get them in
We end up doing,
a row.
so we cut out some low end,
Got an important
so it had room to work with the
place
bass.
go and
And that's another thing. The bass has to work with the guitar, that has to work with the vocal.
Right.
It's like this domino effect with EQ stuff. So I'm constantly going back and forth between different things.
Yeah.
That's why I said it's never a set it and forget it with EQ. So here, let's
And
just.
we're listening in solo to two items in relationship to each other, but this is just kind of an examination of those
Yes.
things. I mean, I don't know about your process. I would probably not be soloing while doing these EQ maneuvers. I would probably be having everything kind of going and then just find out. But I mean, everyone has their own style. Everyone has their own way of approaching it. But this is just to kind of showcase the relationship between the two, just whatever we are soloing.
Yeah, just so everybody can hear exactly what's going on.
I had there was a question from a user, Iman. What's up, Iman? He asked, when using multiple microphones on the same sound source, say a snare, for example, would both microphones be EQ'd the same way, or would you do them differently? I have a little bit to add to it. I do multiple mics on guitars, and we were just on guitars. One of my favorite combinations is an SM57 and a 421.
Yep.
But sometimes I want to EQ one differently than the other. Would you say that that's good practice, or I mean, what do you tend to do in situations like that?
It really depends on the sound you're starting out with. Now, in your case, the 421 is going to have a little bit more bottom than the 57. I tend to use those two mics as EQs themselves. If I want more body, I'd push up the 421. If I want more bite, I'd push up the 57.
Okay.
I think one of my favorite combinations is a 414 and a 57.
Oh, okay.
So in that case, you might EQ by themselves. Maybe run it through the console, pop a little brightness or a little aggression on both of those. But I like to just get a rough balance, then bounce them into one track.
Okay.
And then EQ that one track. So kind of EQing them together.
You're creating a single source out of a multiple microphone scenario.
I commit.
I agree with you, man. I'm a big advocate for committing when you're making records. It's a beautiful feeling, but it takes time to get comfortable doing that sort of thing. So experiment until then, I guess.
Experiment. That's the key through all of this, really.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we're going to have to take another break. We're going to be back with our last segment here in about 15 minutes. This one, we're going to be talking about common mistakes made with EQing, things you want to try to avoid in a situation when you're mixing. Remember, we have a chat room here on prostudiolive.com if you're watching on YouTube or elsewhere, where you can talk to us, shoot us questions to keep this whole thing interactive and engaging for you guys. So we'll be back here pretty soon. Stay tuned.